Mr. Stoltenberg, last July you said, after Donald Trump questioned Article 5, you said solidarity among allies is a key value for NATO, good for European security, good for U.S. security. We defend one another. Are you disappointed that Donald Trump did not explicitly affirm U.S. support for Article 5, did not say that there is an unwavering U.S. commitment to defend all allies no matter what?
President Donald Trump dedicated a 9/11 and Article 5 memorial. And just by doing that, he sent a strong signal. Second, he has strongly committed and strongly stated his commitment and the commitment of the United States to NATO, to our collective security, to our collective defense, and to the security guarantees. He has done so in meetings with me, but he also expressed, for instance, his commitment when we met in Washington some weeks ago. So we have had a clear message from the US administration, from the President, from the Vice President when he was in Brussels, from Secretary Tillerson, from Secretary Mattis, that the United States is committed to NATO, and it's not possible to be committed to NATO without being committed to Article 5 and our collective defense clause, because NATO is about collective defense and the security guarantees. But perhaps even more important than the words and the statements is what we see that is taking place on the ground. So the US commitment to our security guarantees, to Article 5, to collective defense, is not only in words but also in deeds. Just a few days ago, the Trump administration presented a budget proposal with 40% increase in funding for US military presence in Europe. And I think that's the strongest possible sign of commitment to our alliance and to NATO.
Okay. Reuters, first row.
Thanks, Secretary General. Even though you've said all that, there was some disappointment expressed by people who watch NATO closely, and some of the allies. I mean, what would you say to people who feel that Trump is not clear on this issue?
Trump has been clear on his commitment to NATO, but President Trump has also been clear in the message to all allies that we have to deliver on the pledge we made to increase defense spending. He was blunt on that message today, and we have seen this plain speaking from President Trump also before. So he has a clear message on US commitment to the alliance, but he also has a very plain and clear message on the expectations when it comes to burden sharing, fair burden sharing in the alliance. It is absolutely possible to have an ambitious message on defense spending and at the same time have a positive message, because NATO is delivering. We still have a long way to go. Much remains, but it is extremely important that after years of decline in defense spending across Europe and Canada, we turned the corner in 2015, we stopped the cuts, and in 2016 we had significant increase. And the decisions we made today, especially on the national plans, are the best tools we have to make sure that we continue to deliver, that we keep up the momentum. So yes, the President was clear on his commitment, but also clear on his expectations when it comes to that we all carry a fair share of the burden.
Lady in the second row.
Ala Shali from Ruda Television from Kurdistan. My question is about how could NATO support more Peshmerga in the fighting against Daesh in north of Iraq? Thank you.
Several NATO allies are training, providing support to the Peshmerga. And of course, NATO being part of the coalition, we will also take part in the deliberations and the coordination of different activities providing support to the Peshmerga. NATO has not so far provided any training for the Peshmerga. What we have done is to be focused on training Iraqi government forces. So it's too early to say whether that can be an issue. The important thing is, I think, for the Peshmerga is that several NATO allies, as part of the coalition efforts, which NATO now will become a member of, are providing training support for the Peshmerga.
Okay, we'll go to RIA Novosti, second row.
Vladimir Dobrovolsky, Russian news agency RIA Novosti. Secretary General, don't you think that the higher military spending will lead to the new arms race, and how will you explain it to Russia? Thank you.
NATO, it's a defensive alliance. NATO does not seek confrontation with Russia. Actually, we recognize that Russia is our biggest neighbor. Russia is there to stay, and we are striving for a better and more constructive relationship with Russia. At the same time, NATO has to deliver credible deterrence and defense. Because by delivering credible deterrence and defense, we are preventing conflict, we are preventing war. That has been the key to the success of NATO since we were founded almost 70 years ago. And when we see that Russia is willing not only to invest heavily in defense, but to actually use military force to change borders in Europe with its aggressive actions against Ukraine, illegally annexing Crimea, and continuing to undermine, to destabilize eastern Ukraine, then of course NATO has to react. No one was thinking about deploying 4 battle groups to the Baltic countries and Poland before Russia annexed Crimea and started to destabilize eastern Ukraine. So what NATO does is a measured, defensive, proportionate response to the actions of Russia. At the same time, we are working for dialogue. After 2 years of no meetings in the NATO-Russia Council, we were able to agree with Russia on how we could meet again. We have met in the NATO-Russia Council. We discussed difficult issues like Ukraine, but also transparency, risk reduction, our military posture, exercises. And the dialogue with Russia is sometimes difficult, but that's exactly why it is important. So we have responded in a measured and defensive way to make sure that we still convey a strong and clear message of deterrence to prevent conflict and preserve peace.
Afghan media, first row there, Mitra TV. Yep.
Mr. Secretary General, now that you are planning to send more troops to Afghanistan, NATO is planning to send more troops to Afghanistan, in the wake of growing unrest throughout the country and at the time that the Taliban are launching their spring offensives, what sort of concrete results are you expecting in a year's time? And then my second question is the Afghan security forces. They have flaws at all levels, including senior leadership. So what sorts of conditions are you expecting or demanding from the Afghan government in return for their generous pledges? Thank you.
First of all, we haven't decided the exact troop levels for 2018. The current troop level is around 13,000 NATO troops in our train, assist and advise mission. All allies supported the sustainment of our rescue support mission in Afghanistan. Some allies also announced that they're willing to increase their force contributions. But the exact force or troop levels will be decided later on this year. What we are aiming at, and the purpose of our training mission in Afghanistan, is to strengthen the capabilities and the capacities of the Afghan National Security Forces to fight Taliban and to fight different terrorist groups in Afghanistan. And we are in particular working with the Afghan Special Operation Forces. We are helping them to develop their own air forces. They are key in the fight in Afghanistan. And we are also helping them to improve command and control. And one of the issues we are now looking into, whether we can expand what we do in the different military academies. We have never said that it is an easy situation in Afghanistan. It's a difficult situation in Afghanistan. There will be more violence, more challenges, and still many unsolved problems in Afghanistan, including the issue of corruption. But we have made progress, especially in building a strong national Afghan army and security force, which has proven capable, professional, and able to take over responsibility for the security in Afghanistan without NATO forces conducting combat operations, but with our support.
Financial Times, second row, second row.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary General. Was there any sense of unease in the room amongst leaders at the force of Donald Trump's rebuke to them over their defense expenditure, particularly after they had agreed that NATO, as NATO, would be joining the coalition against ISIS? Thank you.
Well, we have heard President Trump before being very blunt on the message about fair burden sharing. And I think all allies are aware of the importance of burden sharing in the alliance. And we have to remember that fair burden sharing was something we addressed at our summit in 2014. Several NATO allies also expressed that we have to invest in defense not just to please the United States, but we have to invest in European defense because it is in our own interest to do so. And therefore, we all welcome the fact that we are now moving in the right direction. The United States is committed to NATO, is committed to collective defense, and we see that not only in words but also in deeds. The US is now increasing its military presence in Europe with a new armored brigade, with more exercises, with more infrastructure, with more pre-positioned equipment and supplies. So we see it really on the ground in Europe, the commitment of the United States to NATO and to our collective defense. But at the same time, the United States, of course, expects that all allies contribute, and that's exactly what we decided in 2014, and we have started to move in the right direction.
And we'll go to the fourth row here. Yeah.
Thank you. President Trump, when addressing the burden sharing on the outside, he talked about the chronic underpayment from NATO member states, and he also said that many of these nations owe massive amounts of money from past years and not paying in those past years. Is that a reasonable claim for the other NATO members? Would that be payable bills in the future? And do you agree on this analysis about the due payments from the past?
What we are talking about is the implementation of the pledge we all made in 2014. And the language there is clear. We commit to stop the cuts, gradually increase, and then move towards spending 2% of GDP on defense. And I know that President Trump has been and still is very clear, blunt, and plain when he is conveying that message to European allies. That was what, and Canada, we saw that again today. But at the same time, I know that President Trump recognizes that European allies and Canada are really moving in the right direction. I remember he told the US Congress that the money is pouring in. So he is aware of that after years of decline, we are now starting to increase. We still have a long way to go. There is still a need to continue to increase defense spending. But that's exactly why we made the decisions we made today to develop a tool that helps us to deliver on the pledge we made, the national plans, which will provide more transparency, reports on how different allies are implementing not only the spending pledge, but also the pledge we made on capabilities and contributions to NATO operations and missions. So again, it is possible to have an ambitious message on defense spending, but at the same time having a positive message on defense spending. And in one way, I think it's what should I say, not surprising that President Trump has a direct way to convey that message.
Gentleman in the front row.
Thank you very much. Voice of America Russian Service. I have two questions about NATO and Russia in particular. What are the main concerns of NATO about Russia? And what was the, recently, Minister of Defense of Russia, Mr. Shoigu, explained Crimea as self-efficient defense and military region, which is capable to, reject any attack. What was the military response of NATO, or tactical, or something else, on this formation of militarization of Crimea? Because everybody is speaking of this. And second question, what was the new, if any, in this summit of your relations, NATO relations with Ukraine, and what will be in the future, what we can expect in the future? Thank you.
So first, we have seen a pattern over some time where Russia is more assertive, where Russia is willing to use military force to intimidate neighbors. We saw it in Georgia. We have seen it in Moldova. We have seen it in Ukraine with the illegal annexation of Crimea, but also with the continuous destabilization of eastern Ukraine. And we have seen a significant military buildup in Russia, and we have seen rhetoric, which is more, much stronger and more threatening than before. And NATO has responded, but we have responded in a balanced, proportionate way, because we don't want confrontation and a new Cold War, but we have to make sure that there is no misunderstanding on NATO's willingness and resolve to defend all allies, and that's the reason why we are deploying our battle groups to the eastern part of the alliance. We are also aware of the A2AD capabilities that Russia has deployed and developed, and we are taking that into account in our military planning, in the development of our military capabilities, to be able to continue to provide the necessary support and deterrence, which is core for the alliance. When it comes to Ukraine, it was clearly stated by many allies, and the whole alliance is behind the message that we are going to continue to strengthen our close partnership with Ukraine, to provide practical support, political support, and there was a strong support, of course, for all efforts to try to make sure that we are really able to implement the Minsk agreements, and especially allowing the international monitors to be able to do their job.
Okay, we'll go front row, Cala Europeană, yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary General, today Mr. Trump met Donald Tusk, the President of the European Council. After the meeting, Mr. Tusk said they don't share the same opinion on Russia, and my question is, after the meeting today with the NATO allies, do the allies share the same opinion on Russia today?
So I was not present in the meeting between President Trump and President Tusk, but I know what the NATO position is. And the NATO position is clear, and we have a united alliance behind it. And I think it's hard, in a way, the unity in NATO on our approach to Russia is actually stronger than I've seen for many, many years. Because especially at the Warsaw Summit, we were able to establish a common understanding and trust in our approach among all allies. So the support for our approach is stronger than I've seen for a long time. And the message is the same, that we need credible deterrence and dialogue. and that's exactly what we now are delivering on. We are delivering on credible deterrence with the strongest reinforcement of collective defense since the end of the Cold War. At the same time, we're engaged in political dialogue with Russia. It's not easy, but it is important.
Washington Post at the back. Yeah.
Hi, Michael Birnbaum from the Washington Post. Thanks. Another question about Donald Trump and Article 5 commitments. You've been very clear, and his subordinates, Sean Spicer, his spokesman, after the speech today, was very clear that the United States is committed to collective defense. Why then, I mean, did Trump explain during the dinner, did he explain to you, do you have an explanation why he hasn't then explicitly endorsed it with words as opposed to actions? And is this just a negotiating tactic? Thank you.
As I said, he has many times clearly stated in meetings, conversations with me, that he and the United States is clearly committed to NATO, and it's no way possible to be committed to NATO without being committed to Article 5 and our collective defense clause, because NATO is about collective defense. I remember he also stated that publicly, for instance, when we met in Washington. Then he reaffirmed the U.S. commitment to the NATO alliance and to, as I say, our shared values. He also referred today to the commitments that binds us together, and the commitments that binds us together are collective defense and everything related to Article 5. And second, he inaugurated a 9/11 and Article 5 memorial. And thirdly, the U.S. is now delivering on more U.S. presence in Europe, which I think is the strongest expression of the U.S. commitment to NATO and to the collective defense clause.
Last question, Süddeutsche Zeitung. Yeah. There. There. No.
Sorry. Herr Bossler, Süddeutsche Zeitung. Secretary General, how do you explain the obviously conflicting messages coming out of this meeting? On one hand, the decision of Wales was reconfirmed. On the other hand, President Trump clearly stated that 2% is actually not enough. And maybe an additional question to that. Is, in your view, the fight against migration a core task of NATO, as President Trump actually said? Thank you.
When it comes to migration, that's not a core task of NATO, but it is an area where NATO also plays a role. Because we, for instance, help the European Union in the Aegean Sea. We have deployed naval ships in the Aegean Sea to help implement the Turkish EU agreement. And we have helped them to stem the flow of illegal migration over the Aegean Sea, especially with German presence in that naval activity. We are also helping in the Central Mediterranean, the EU Operation Sophia with our maritime operation Sea Guardian. And we are also addressing some of the root causes for the migration and refugee crisis we see. Because by working with partners in the wider Middle East region, in North Africa, in Middle East, but also in Afghanistan, we are helping to stabilize many of the countries where many of the refugees are and migrants are coming from. So yes, NATO has a role to play. There are many other organizations, nations that are playing perhaps a more important role, but we are helping, assisting, and playing our role in addressing the root causes. President Trump expressed that for him 2% is a minimum. And some allies are spending more than 2%. And this is part of the clear, blunt message from President Trump. At the same time, we all agree that the important thing now is to implement and to deliver and to make good on the promise we made in 2014, which is about stopping the cuts, gradual increase, and then moving towards spending 2% of GDP on defense. And as I've stated many times, we are moving on, we are moving forward because we have stopped the cuts, we have started to increase, and this year Romania announced that they will reach the 2% target. Next year Latvia and Lithuania have announced that they will reach the 2% target. So total defense spending is increasing, and more countries are reaching the 2% guideline.
Thank you very much. This concludes this press conference. I wish you a good night. Thank you.
Thank you.